I never dated here because I saw vicariously through my roommate how terrible it was. Somehow getting drinks was the replacement of having coffee and breakfast.
There's a picture of Erika Kirk with a ponytail, and from her past. That person matches who I saw at Fort Huachuca in the lobby the night before, and she was with that man in the lobby, and that man, he was present at that.
Charlie Kirk didn't need social media noise to sense something was off with Erika. That feeling had been building quietly for a long time, sitting heavy in the background, and then suddenly, a leaked audio recording flipped everything upside down. People familiar with the situation claim the recording suggests Erika may have been reconnecting with her ex behind the scenes, and the timing of those conversations raised serious questions that couldn't just be brushed aside. What really made things intense is that there are alleged call logs and messages that seem to line up almost perfectly with specific dates. That's when the situation started looking less like random coincidence and more like something deeper. And this wasn't coming out of nowhere either. Charlie's parents had reportedly been questioning things for months, not just reacting overnight. This had been building slowly, with people close to the family quietly comparing details and realizing parts of the story didn't fully match up. Instead of ignoring it, everything shifted direction fast. Charlie's parents stepped in directly and pushed for a move that changed the tone completely. A DNA test became part of the conversation. According to insiders, Charlie had already been asking himself similar questions, but kept them to himself, not wanting to be the one to spark a situation that couldn't be controlled once it started. Because once you open that door, there's no going back. If Erika wasn't being fully honest about the alleged situation, then it raises even more questions. What else didn't line up? What details were left unclear behind the scenes? And before even getting into why this recording surfaced now, or why Charlie's parents are no longer staying quiet, one thing stands out. These issues didn't just appear overnight. This looks like a chain of events that had been building quietly, waiting for the moment everything would come out.
A picture of Erika Kirk, and I'm assuming her baby, but listen, look at her hands. I'm going to show you a picture of these scars. There is a scar right there. Zoom in on it if you need to.
Erika had built a very specific public image over the years. She presented herself as someone disciplined, focused, and grounded. In her version of events, she kept her personal life simple, avoided distractions, and stayed away from the kind of situations that usually bring drama. According to that narrative, she met the right person, built a life around family, and kept everything controlled and clean. And this wasn't something she mentioned once and moved on from. She repeated that image consistently in interviews, conversations, and public appearances, reinforcing it again and again like it was locked in place. During a CBS town hall, she even clearly stated that she hadn't dated anyone in the years before meeting Charlie. That detail mattered because it helped shape how people saw her, setting her apart and presenting a very specific identity. But Charlie reportedly never fully believed the full picture. From early on, he noticed small inconsistencies, timelines that didn't fully connect, periods that felt unclear, details that seemed to shift slightly depending on who was asking, one version here, another version there. He paid attention to it all, but without clear proof, it stayed in that uncomfortable space where questions exist, but answers stay out of reach. That reportedly changed when new claims surfaced, suggesting Erika's ex had shared private images that placed her in New York, living independently during the same time period being discussed. And once that detail entered the conversation, everything became harder to ignore, and the situation started to feel a lot bigger than anyone expected. Erika claimed she wasn't seeing anyone at all, and that's exactly why this hit so hard. Because once those images started circulating, they didn't just question her story, they went straight against the image she had spent years building. It wasn't a small detail either. It challenged the entire foundation of how she presented herself to the public, and suddenly people started looking at everything differently.
I never dated here because I saw vicariously through my roommate how terrible it was. Somehow getting drinks was the replacement of having coffee and breakfast. I personally would rather have coffee or brunch with someone than going, I don't drink. I find it unproductive, not because I'm holier than whatever. I just don't operate that way. But I always thought it was very strange how she would go to drinks with one guy and then go to dinner with another.
And here's where things start getting messy fast. Erika wasn't completely out of the spotlight during that time. She actually appeared on season 3 of Summer House, filmed back in August 2018 across New York City bars and the Hamptons. The footage shows her out socializing, enjoying herself, and moving freely in ways that didn't match the controlled version of her life she later described as her truth. When those clips resurfaced, Erika tried to downplay it, saying it didn't really matter and that it was harmless. But that explanation only made people question things even more, because if it truly meant nothing, why go so far trying to distance herself from it later? Why push so hard to deny something that was already out there for everyone to see? Once people started digging deeper, the inconsistencies stacked up quickly. Stories didn't match timelines, timelines didn't match records, and suddenly Charlie's earlier doubts didn't seem exaggerated anymore. They started to look reasonable. What once felt like quiet suspicion began to look like a pattern forming right in front of everyone. Because this wasn't just about small changes to her past. It looked like an attempt to completely reshape it. And the bigger issue people keep pointing out is that this chapter of her life may not have been fully closed before Charlie entered the picture. That detail alone shifted how the entire situation was being viewed. During that same period, Erika was publicly connected to multiple people, even though she later suggested that part of her life didn't exist. And this wasn't something hidden either. One of those relationships involved Tyler J.T. Massey, and at the time, she spoke about him openly without hesitation. In an Arizona Foothills magazine interview, Erika didn't hold back. She described him with admiration, calling him her favorite person, her best friend, and her incredible boyfriend. That level of openness makes the later shift in her story stand out even more.
And that was until I hosted the first Trump rally in Trump rally history right here in Arizona in 2015. I got a call. From Miss Erika Kirk, Miss Arizona 2012. I just want to help, she said. So naturally, I put her right behind the president at that first rally.
Because the public record paints a completely different picture. And it didn't just fade away quietly either. For a while, many people believed Erika and JT were actually engaged. There were no confirmed records, but engagement-style photos of the two spread quickly online. And once those images resurfaced later, they brought back questions that clearly weren't meant to come back into focus, making the situation even more intense than before. But the moment that really pushed everything into overdrive came from older footage, filmed at a rally back in 2015. In that clip, Erika is seen standing next to a man with a young girl positioned between them. Once the internet got hold of it and started slowing it down frame by frame, people began pointing out details and drawing connections that quickly fueled online discussion. To be clear, nothing in that footage was ever officially confirmed or verified. But the visuals alone were enough to bring the conversation back to life in a big way. And then one specific detail made everything even more intense. In that same scene, sitting nearby in the bleachers was Tyler Bauer, the same Tyler who would later introduce Erika to Charlie and who is now closely tied to leadership within Turning Point USA. That overlap didn't sit right with a lot of people watching this unfold, because at that point, the discussion stopped being just about past relationships. It shifted into something bigger. People started questioning how long Erika had been moving in those same circles before she ever claimed to meet Charlie. It raised new questions about timing, connections, and whether certain parts of her story had been reshaped along the way. Critics began asking whether she had truly taken time to move on from previous chapters in her life, or if she had simply reworked the narrative and stepped into a new version of herself that better matched the moment. And that's where things started to feel heavier for a lot of observers, because the situation no longer looked like simple confusion. It started to look more intentional. When Erika eventually stood beside Charlie, presenting herself as someone deeply committed to her values and ready for a serious future, some people began to question how much of that image reflected her real journey. They wondered if the version being shown publicly was fully complete, or if parts of the story had been carefully shaped to fit a certain perception. And that's where the conversation takes a sharper turn. Some critics believe this wasn't just about a fast-moving romance, but about timing lining up in a way that worked in her favor. They argue that the relationship came together at a moment that allowed her to step into a more stable position while also gaining access to new opportunities and influence. That perspective becomes even more discussed when looking at her connection to Tyler Bauer. As many already know, Bauer stepped into a leadership role at Turning Point USA back in 2017. Not long after that, he arranged what was publicly described as a professional introduction between Erika and Charlie, something that unexpectedly turned into their first date. And that's where even more questions start to surface, because just before that introduction happened, Erika wasn't exactly disconnected from everything or waiting quietly in the background. Instead, it appears she was already active, already connected, and already moving within spaces that would later play a major role in how this entire story unfolded. She wasn't searching, and she definitely wasn't living the calm, disciplined lifestyle she later described. In fact, Erika later acknowledged that she was actively seeing Cabot Phillips during that time. And Cabot isn't just some random name. He's known as a senior editor at the Daily Wire, working closely with Ben Shapiro. And that connection immediately caught people's attention. When people started revisiting the timeline, the details didn't just loosely connect, they lined up in a way that raised even more questions. That's why some critics argue this wasn't about fate or perfect timing. To them, it looked like a calculated move, handled quietly, and positioned at a moment when new opportunities were opening up. And this is where things get even more complicated. The same Cabot Phillips that Charlie would later have public disagreements with over certain professional tensions was already part of this timeline. That overlap alone stood out. But once older posts resurfaced, the situation became even harder to ignore. One of Cabot's past social media posts from September 2017 showed him and Erika spending time together, confirming they were connected during that exact period. That detail made Erika's later claims about avoiding relationships feel less clear to some observers. And then more images from that same time frame began circulating, showing both Cabot and Charlie appearing in similar social settings, including a basketball game where both were present. That matters because if their social circles were already overlapping, then the idea of a completely random introduction later on starts to look less straightforward. Once people factor in that Erika was connected to Cabot while also being introduced to Charlie through Tyler Bauer, the timeline begins to look much more layered than it first appeared. From that perspective, Charlie's earlier doubts don't come across as overreactions. They start to look like questions that were building up over time. And according to insiders, Charlie didn't respond with loud confrontations or public drama. Instead, as more details seemed to line up, he reportedly became more reserved. From that point forward, people say the dynamic in the relationship began to shift. Charlie appeared more guarded, more careful with what he shared, and more measured in decisions that affected his personal life. Nothing dramatic happened overnight, but the overall energy reportedly changed, and that kind of quiet shift can be difficult to ignore. Because when trust starts to feel uncertain, even in subtle ways, it can affect everything. It leads to rethinking past moments, revisiting conversations, and questioning details that once seemed clear. And for some observers, that's what made this situation stand out. Not loud conflict, but the slow change that happens when questions don't fully go away. Charlie didn't panic. He adjusted, and that difference says everything. Instead of reacting loudly or making public claims, he quietly changed how he moved behind the scenes. One of the biggest shifts people noticed was how intentional he became about keeping his parents closely involved with the kids, not just as loving grandparents, but as a steady presence that added structure and support. At the time, people noticed it, but didn't fully understand why. Now it starts to make more sense. Charlie didn't want the kids surrounded by a version of reality he wasn't fully confident in. He didn't want everything explained through one perspective or reshaped later. He wanted balance, consistency, and trusted family members around who understood his concerns and could see things clearly in real time. That way, nothing could be quietly reinterpreted or softened after the fact. He wasn't looking for control. He was looking for clarity. He wanted routines, presence, and people who could witness everyday life as it happened, not through selective retelling. And if you were paying attention, that shift wasn't subtle at all. The energy changed, the structure changed, and the way Charlie approached decisions involving the kids became noticeably more careful and intentional. This wasn't about overreacting, it was about grounding and protection. When trust starts to feel uncertain, even in quiet ways, it changes everything. Nothing runs on autopilot anymore. Every step becomes deliberate, every decision carries more weight, and every safeguard suddenly matters more than before. Charlie began organizing his life like someone who sensed challenges ahead, even if he never said it out loud. His routines became tighter, his circle became smaller, and his decisions felt more measured. It looked like someone preparing quietly, hoping for stability, but no longer ignoring the possibility of complications. There were no dramatic public moments, no loud confrontations, no headlines about conflict. But behind the scenes, his actions spoke clearly. He planned carefully, protected what mattered, and positioned himself in a way that reflected a shift in trust. It wasn't chaos, it was calculated caution. And this is where everything starts to intensify. Now that Charlie is no longer present to respond, clarify or balance the narrative, the responsibility didn't disappear. It shifted. According to people close to the family, his parents have stepped forward and made it clear they're no longer willing to overlook what has surfaced. Questions about timelines, overlapping connections, and past details are no longer being set aside. From their perspective, these are serious matters that need clear answers. Reports suggest they have asked for DNA testing, not out of emotion or conflict, but because they feel a responsibility to seek clarity on important issues. What makes this moment even more significant is the timing. Charlie may have carried his concerns quietly while he was here, choosing to avoid conflict and keep things steady. But his parents are now in a different position. They're the ones facing the unanswered questions, the responsibility, and the weight of making sure everything is fully understood moving forward. They're not focused on keeping a clean or polished story if that comes at the expense of the kids' well-being. What they want is clarity, certainty, and protection, not appearances. This isn't about getting even or creating public pressure. It's about making sure everything moving forward is built on something solid, not uncertainty. Because when the person who once held everything together is no longer there, the responsibility shifts to those left behind, and the decisions become much harder. Right now, they're choosing answers over silence and protection over maintaining a version of events that no longer feels reliable. And here's the part that's making people uneasy. There are increasing reports suggesting that if the DNA tests confirm the children are Charlie's, his parents may consider taking further legal steps regarding custody. That possibility changes everything, because now the situation goes beyond questions about the past or disagreements over timelines. It becomes about stability, responsibility, and who is best positioned to provide a secure environment for the kids. The fact that this is even being discussed shows how much trust has reportedly been affected. Decisions like that don't come lightly. For grandparents to even consider stepping into that kind of role, it suggests a deep level of concern. From their point of view, this isn't about conflict. It's about making sure the children are raised in a consistent and supportive environment they can depend on. Now, everything depends on results that can't be reshaped or explained away. If the tests confirm what Charlie may have quietly questioned over time, then the situation could move into a serious legal phase. It wouldn't just stay in the realm of resurfaced details or past claims. It could evolve into a formal dispute that brings private concerns into the public spotlight. And that's where the weight of it really hits. Because this wouldn't just change how the story is told, it would bring attention back to moments Charlie chose to handle privately. Every hesitation, every quiet decision, every time he held back could be viewed in a completely new way. But if the outcome goes in the opposite direction, the impact is just as heavy. That would suggest Charlie carried uncertainty for years without ever finding clear answers. It would mean he lived with questions he may not have felt comfortable addressing openly. Either way, there's no simple resolution here. The results won't just answer one question. They'll reshape how everything is understood moving forward. These results don't just answer questions. They decide how this entire story will be remembered. And once they come out, there's no undo button, no quiet reset, and no going back to acting like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. No matter how this plays out, the image Erika spent years building has already taken a serious hit. That polished version is breaking down piece by piece, and rebuilding it won't be simple. What's left now isn't about perception or branding anymore. It's about records, timelines, and a situation where trust has been shaken to the core. Details are being compared, stories are being questioned, and nothing is being accepted at face value without clear proof. And right in the middle of all of this are the kids, caught in a situation that should have been handled quietly and clearly long before things reached this level. Instead of stability, there's uncertainty. Instead of clarity, there are ongoing questions. And that's what's making people uneasy, because these are decisions being made above them, while the environment around them keeps shifting. That alone has raised serious concern about how everything is being handled moving forward. Charlie never made this public while he was here. He didn't go online, didn't make loud claims, and didn't push things into the spotlight. He kept his concerns to himself, choosing restraint instead of turning everything into chaos, even when things didn't fully sit right with him. That silence wasn't about ignoring the situation, it was about control and discipline. But now that he's no longer here to manage that balance, everything has changed. That silence is gone, and the people stepping in now aren't focused on maintaining appearances. They're focused on getting answers. They're no longer willing to overlook inconsistencies or leave questions hanging. From their perspective, Bringing everything into the open is the only way forward. Because once trust reaches this point, pretending no longer works. Old details are being revisited, timelines are being rechecked, and questions that were once pushed aside are now impossible to ignore. This isn't about image anymore. It's about clarity, responsibility, and making sure nothing important moves forward without certainty. And once that door is fully opened, there's no closing it again. No reset, no easy way out, and no escaping whatever the truth ultimately reveals. So now it comes down to this. What do you think really happened behind the scenes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Stay locked in, because this story is far from over. And I'll catch you in the next one.